Imagine for a second, you've got this fully armed F-15E Strike Eagle, right? Engines are hot, it's sitting on the tarmac, ready to launch. And this thing has enough firepower to, absolutely level a city block. It's got the tech to evade some of the most advanced radar networks on the planet. But legally and operationally, that jet actually can't move a single inch without this massive invisible web of paperwork and legal authority.
Right, it's a completely static piece of metal without the system behind it.
Exactly, and that chain of command, it stretches all the way from that flight line back to a civilian sitting in the Oval Office. So today, we are mapping that exact invisible web. Welcome to the deep dive. We're looking at the technical sergeant promotion cycle today, specifically unpacking the Level B and Level C comprehension sections. And we're pulling this directly from the U.S. Air Force Handbook 1, Chapters 4, 5, and 6.
And, the physical manifestation of military force is fundamentally useless without the statutory authority required to actually project it. Like, to understand the Department of Defense, the DoD, you really have to view it not just as a collection of weapons.
Right.
It's a rigid, highly calibrated, bureaucratic machine. And we're looking at this strictly through the lens of you, the technical sergeant.
Yeah, which means we're not just reciting facts here. Level A memorization is totally irrelevant for this.
It's totally irrelevant. We're talking about level B, which is understanding the relationship logic between distinct military concepts, and level C, which is the strict application of those concepts in real leadership execution, because we need to analyze the functional mechanisms of the Air Force and, more importantly, the clinical consequences when you misapply those mechanisms.
And the administrative wreckage that follows, right. So let's start with the foundation. The operating environment of this whole machine is broken down into 3 specific spaces. You've got air, space, and cyberspace. And this isn't just geographic, is it?
No, not at all. It's dictated by fundamental laws of physics. The air domain is classified as the region above the Earth's surface, where aerodynamics generally govern operations.
Okay, so aerodynamics.
Right, which means your reliance on atmospheric density dictates everything. It dictates the logistical footprint, your maintenance schedules, operational limits. You need air for lift and control surfaces.
But the second you punch out of the atmosphere,
physics completely change. You hit the space domain, and now you're governed entirely by astrodynamics.
Right, no more atmospheric drag.
Exactly. An asset in space is subject to orbital mechanics, gravity wells, mathematically precise trajectories. And as a technical sergeant coordinating joint ops, you have to understand this pivot because it completely alters your time frame and your flexibility.
Because an aircraft can just, loiter, right? It can change its flight path dynamically.
Yeah, but a satellite, that operates on a predictable, immutable orbit. You can't just tell it to spin around and go back.
Right. And then you have this third domain that connects them both, which is cyberspace. And this one is, well, it's not a physical place you can drop troops into.
No, it's a global domain within the information environment. It's the interdependent network of IT infrastructures, the internet, telecom networks, computer systems, embedded processors.
It's the central nervous system, basically.
That is exactly what it is. And if you sever that cyber link, the muscular force in the air domain and the surveillance in the space domain, they're paralyzed.
Wow.
Yeah, they can't transmit data, they can't receive targeting coordinates, they can't even authenticate command directives. So you have to understand that a cyber failure doesn't just delay a mission, it actively degrades the physical assets.
It's a triad. They all rely on each other. So operating in these domains means you have to know exactly what physical assets you have. The military obviously can't function on ambiguous descriptions. And that starts, I guess, visually, right?
Yep.
With the tail flashes on the aircraft.
Yes. Historically, warriors carried physical banners into combat to establish identity. The modern equivalent of that battle standard is the tail flash.
Even though most of these planes are just, low visibility gray for camouflage.
Right. Operational security mandates the gray, but the tail flash serves a critical administrative function. It displays the base code, the specific unit, and the serial number, what we call the tail number.
Unless it's the flagship.
Exactly. The flagship is the one aircraft designated to represent the unit commander. It's a morale asset, usually authorized to have a unique, high-visibility fin flash. It's used for static displays, air shows, that sort of thing.
But the visual stuff is just surface level. If you really want to know what the machine does, you have to look at the MDS, the Mission Design Series, which to me is kind of like reading a vehicle's VIN or a license plate. Once you know the code, you know exactly what it's built to do.
That's a great analogy. The NDS is the DoD's official alphanumeric naming system. It's the genetic code of the aircraft. It tells you the primary function, the design iteration, and specific modifications.
So break that down for us. It's split into two parts by a dash, right?
Yes. The primary alphabetical indicator before the dash is the foundational mission. So C is transport cargo or personnel. F is fighter air-to-air or air-to-ground. B is bomber for strategic strike.
And what about unmanned stuff?
That's QS, and that completely alters the risk calculus for a joint commander, knowing there's no human pilot on board. X is experimental, meaning it's outside standard deployment parameters. And V is VIP or staff transport, which changes the whole security protocol on the flight line.
Right, you treat a V very differently than a C.
Exactly. And then after the dash, you have the design number identifying the airframe and a series letter for the model iteration. So an F-15E is a fighter, the 15th design, and the E model upgrade package.
So let's take a look at the actual fleet roster mentioned in the text, because this MDS coding gets wild when they adapt one airframe for completely different missions, like the C-130 Hercules. That's your tactical airlift workhorse landing on dirt strips. It's a C for transport. But then they modify the insides.
And the prefix changes completely. If you modify it into a gunship, it becomes the AC-130, A for attack. That means close air support, armed reconnaissance.
At heavy munitions, right.
Exactly. The logistical needs are totally different. You need specialized weapons technicians. Now, if you take that same airframe and make it an EC-130, you've added the E prefix for special electronic installation.
Oh, like the Compass Call or Commando Solo variants?
Right. Those are for electronic warfare, signal jamming, psyops. Now imagine a technical sergeant in logistics fails to recognize the difference in the MDS.
Oh, man. They send gunship ammo to the PSYOPs guys.
Exactly. The administrative record is profound. You route munitions to an electronic warfare platform, and you've effectively paralyzed both units because of a paperwork failure.
Systemic logic. If you break it, the mission fails. Let's talk about the E3 Sentry, the AWACS. That uses the E prefix too, right?
Yes. Airborne Warning and Control System. It's a deployable command and control battle management platform. It basically provides the centralized, elevated radar picture to direct tactical assets in real time.
So it manages the battle theater. But what if things go, full doomsday? You have the E4B NAOC.
The National Airborne Operations Center. This is a highly survivable node of the National Military Command System. If terrestrial command infrastructure is wiped out in a national emergency, the E4B gives the president and the SecDef the connectivity to direct forces globally.
So the E3 manages the theater, but the E4B manages the nation.
Precisely. It's a matter of scale.
And to keep all these things in the air, you need the KC-135 Stratotanker. K for tanker. It's just a massive flying gas station.
Right. Over 50 years of core aerial refueling. It mathematically extends the range and loiter time of combat aircraft. And it also has a cargo deck above the fuel tanks, so it has a secondary transport capability.
What about the intelligence side? The text mentions a couple of ISR platforms.
Right. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. You have the MC-12, which is a twin-engine turboprop for low-altitude direct support to ground forces, very close to the tactical environment.
And then the exact opposite of that is the RQ-4 Global Hawk.
R for reconnaissance, Q for unmanned, high altitude, long endurance. It collects massive amounts of data across huge areas without risking a pilot to fatigue or hostile fire.
Makes sense. And just to round out the fleet, we've got the VC-25, V for VIP, C for transport. That's Air Force One when the president is on board.
Yes. Then the C-40, which is basically an airborne office for combatant commanders. The T-1A Jayhawk, T's for trainer, used to prepare pilots for airlift and tanker roles. And the UV-18, a utility platform used for parachute training at the Air Force Academy.
Right. Now, maintaining all this hardware, especially the lethal stuff, it's not just checking oil levels. The text talks about munitions, and it makes it very clear there is zero margin for error here.
Absolutely zero. When a technical sergeant is overseeing munitions handling assembly, arming, disarming explosive ordnance, they aren't just supervising labor, they are managing catastrophic risk.
Right.
A deviation from technical data doesn't just mean a slap on the wrist, it means the vaporization of assets and personnel. You follow the technical orders strictly.
Okay, so we've got the hardware down, but let's move from the tarmac to the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Because knowing what the machine does is useless if you don't know who holds the keys, who actually has the authority to issue the orders.
Well, the fundamental principle here is civilian control of the military. The president is the commander-in-chief and holds ultimate command authority.
And then the chain of command flows down from there.
Yes, directly to the Secretary of Defense, the SecDef. a civilian appointee who formulates broad defense policy. And from the SecDef, operational command flows straight to the combatant commanders, the CCDRs, out in the field.
Now wait, what about the highest-ranking generals? Where do they fit into that operational chain?
This is where the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986 comes in.
Right. The text mentions this specifically.
It was a massive legislative overhaul after some serious joint operational failures. It allows the president to place the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CJCS, into the communications chain.
The communications chain, but not the command chain.
Exactly. The CJCS exercises absolutely zero military command over any combatant forces.
I have to stop you there because that always blows my mind.
Yeah.
The highest-ranking officer in the entire U.S. military cannot order troops into battle.
They cannot. And it's not a glitch. It's a deliberate architectural safeguard.
How so?
By stripping the chairman of command authority, the law guarantees they function purely as an objective military advisor to the president and the SecDef. Think about it. If the chairman had operational command, their advice would be inherently biased.
Oh, because they'd be fighting for resources for their own commands or defending their own operational decisions?
Exactly. Objective counsel requires separation from operational execution. You can't evaluate the system impartially if you are running the system.
And the scale of this system is just massive. The DoD is America's largest government agency. 1.3 million regular forces, 826,000 Guard and Reserve, 742,000 civilians. It's a small country.
Which is why the Pentagon has key advisory players to manage it. You have the Armed Forces Policy Council, which takes the long-range view on defense policy. It's the SecDef, the service secretaries, the CJCS, and the service chiefs building consensus for the future.
And underneath the chairman, you have the Joint Staff, right? And they have the vice chairman, the VCJCS.
Right, serving a 2-year tour. And here is another statutory safeguard. The VCJCS cannot be from the same branch as the chairman.
Ah, so if the chairman is Army, the vice has to be Navy or Air Force.
Precisely. It prevents service parochialism. It forces a synthesis of perspectives balancing air power doctrine with naval strategy, for example.
Makes total sense. And for the enlisted side, there's the SEAC, the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman.
Yes. The highest-ranking enlisted position in the armed forces. Their focus is total force integration and the health of the enlisted force. For a technical sergeant, the SEAC is the ultimate systemic escalation point.
Okay, so that's the overarching leadership.
Uh-huh.
But how did the military decide who actually does what? Because if you have millions of people, you need a division of labor. Which brings us to 1948 and the Key West Agreement.
Right, revised in 1958. This is the foundational contract that assigns the specific roles and missions to each branch. Because after World War II, with strategic air power and nukes, the lines between what the Army did and what the Navy did were getting incredibly blurry.
And blurry lines lead to budget fights.
Exactly. Chaos. So Key West established clear boundaries. The Army is tasked with sustained land dominance. The Navy is prompt and sustained combat at sea, keeping sea lanes open.
And the Navy includes the Marine Corps, right?
Yes. The Marines specialize in the seizure and defense of advanced naval bases and amphibious ops. They are the maritime projection of land force.
And the Coast Guard.
Under the Department of Homeland Security during peacetime, handling maritime law enforcement and icebreaking. But during wartime, they transfer administratively and operationally to the Department of the Navy.
Okay, and then the Department of the Air Force, which now has 2 branches.
Right, the Air Force and the Space Force. The Air Force handles general air supremacy, strategic airlift, and air reconnaissance. The Space Force handles operations in, from, and to space.
So hearing all this, it sounds very siloed. Army stays on the ground, Navy stays in the water. Are they really that separated?
No, and that's the critical misinterpretation. The actual mandate of the Key West Agreement is unity of effort. The functions are specific so that each branch can organize, train, and equip highly specialized forces. But they are required to coordinate in all aspects of joint concern.
So they train separately to fight together.
Exactly. The Air Force doesn't just fly planes for itself. It is statutorily required to support Army airborne operations. The Navy coordinates amphibious assaults with Air Force logistics. If a TSGT shows service bias or rivalry in a joint environment, they are violating the Key West mandate. You are building components to plug into a unified joint architecture.
And that joint architecture translates to the global map through the Unified Combatant Commands, the CCMBs.
Yes. The President establishes these based on the Unified Command Plan, the UCP, which is updated every 2 years. And these are split into geographic commands and functional commands.
Right, so the geographic ones have literal borders. You've got U.S. AFRICOM in Stuttgart for Africa, U.S. CENTCOM at MacDill Air Force Base, handling 20 countries in the Middle East and Central Asia, which is a massive volatile theater.
UCUCOM, also in Stuttgart for Europe. U.S. NORTHCOM at Peterson Air Force Base, handling Homeland Defense and NORAD.
And then the functional commands ignore borders entirely, right?
Correct. They provide global capabilities. USOCOM for special ops, U.S. STRATCOM for nuclear deterrence, U.S. CyberCom for the networks, U.S. TRANSCOM for global logistical supply chains.
So if a geographic commander, say at CENTCOM, needs Air Force assets, they don't just call up random squadrons.
No, they utilize the COMA-4, the Commander, Air Force Forces. This is the single unified voice for Air Force capabilities in that joint command.
And the troops they pull from are part of what's called a total force, the one-team concept, which isn't just active duty.
Right. It's the regular Air Force, the Reserve, the Air National Guard, and civilian employees. The Guard and Reserve used to be viewed as just a strategic backup, but now they are fully operational, integrated forces that deploy right alongside active duty.
And there are civilian auxiliaries, too.
Yes, the Civil Air Patrol, the CAP with its 8 regions and 52 wings doing search and rescue and cadet programs, and AFJ ROTC in high schools. A TSUT has to leverage all these components identically. Bias against Guard or Reserve components actively degrades the mission.
Okay, so let's look at how the Air Force organizes itself internally to manage all this. At the very top, you have Headquarters Air Force, the HAF.
Right, which includes the Secretariat for Civilian Oversight, the Air Staff headed by the CSF, and the Space Staff.
And the Air Staff uses this universal A-Staff coding system.
Yes, to ensure communication routes instantly to the right experts. A1 is manpower, A3 is ops, A4 is logistics, A8 is strategic plans. If a TSGT miswrites a manpower request, they create administrative delays that compromise readiness.
Got it. Below headquarters, you have the major commands, the MHMs. And the text makes a strict distinction between a lead MAJCOM and a component MAJCOM.
It does. A lead MAJCOM consolidates a specific function across the entire Air Force, like AETC, Air Education and Training Command. Activated July 1st, 1993, with 25 million graduates. They handle all the training. Or ASOC at Hurlburt Field for special tactics.
Whereas a component MAJCOM is tied to a specific geographic theater.
Right, like Pacific Air Forces supporting Indo-Pacific Command.
Okay, and then as we go lower into the tactical echelons, you get the numbered Air Force, the NAF. And the text says a NAF headquarters is capped at a maximum of 99 staff. Then below that is the wing, which has a minimum population of 1,000. And a group requires a minimum of 400. Why is the military so obsessed with these specific headcount thresholds?
Because it's a mathematical necessity for joint planning. It's about span of control and standardization. If a combatant commander requests a wing, they instantly know the logistical, medical, and administrative footprint required to sustain 1,000 personnel.
So it's a known quantity.
Exactly. If a wing tries to operate with only 300 people, it lacks the administrative scaffolding to deploy autonomously, and capping a NAF at 99 people forces them to focus on tactical execution rather than building some redundant administrative empire. If a TSGT doesn't understand these thresholds, they don't realize that manpower shortages threaten the statutory classification of the entire unit.
Wow. Okay, so we built the hardware, we mapped the hierarchy. Now we need to talk about the operating system that runs in the minds of the airmen. Air power doctrine.
There's a quote from General Curtis E. LeMay from the early 60s. Leaders are not born. They're educated, trained, and made. Doctrine is that educational blueprint. It's the airman's inheritance.
The crystallized lessons of past wars.
Yes, so every new generation doesn't have to relearn these lessons in blood.
And it's broken down into 3 levels: basic, operational, and tactical.
Basic doctrine is AFTP 1. It's our premier statement of beliefs. It changes very slowly because it's foundational. Operational doctrine is how we organize forces for the Joint Force Commander. And tactical doctrine is the precise mechanical employment of specific assets.
Like how to drop a specific bomb.
Right. Found in the classified MIG-3 series manuals. And because it's tied to technology, it changes rapidly. As a TSGT, debating basic doctrine during a tactical crisis is a total failure of execution. You have to know which level you're operating on.
And this doctrine relies on a few key principles, like using domains, not owning domains.
Which goes back to the Key West Agreement. No branch has a monopoly on a space. You use whatever joint asset achieves the effect most efficiently. And organization, not organizations. The focus is on the unified outcome, not preserving the purity of an individual squadron.
Then there are the core tenets: unity of command, objective, simplicity, restraint, legitimacy. But the big philosophy balancing all this is mission command. And this is where I want to push back a little bit.
Okay.
Because mission command relies on centralized command, distributed control, and decentralized execution. Now, isn't centralized command and decentralized execution a complete oxymoron? How do you have both?
It sounds contradictory, but the logic is actually flawless. You need centralized command, one single orchestrator, because air power can traverse a continent in hours. If every local commander dictated their own air strategy, you'd have fragmented chaos.
Right, you'd waste finite resources.
Exactly. But war is full of friction. Communications break down. Opportunities are fleeting. If a pilot sees a time-sensitive target, they cannot route a request through 5 echelons of command.
By the time they get permission, the target's gone.
Right, so you need decentralized execution. You empower the boots on the ground or the pilot in the cockpit to exploit those opportunities. The centralized commander dictates the why and sets the boundaries. The decentralized operator, like a TSGT, determines the precise how.
So when it fails, it's either micromanagement from the top or an operator exceeding their legal boundaries at the bottom.
Yes, and exceeding boundaries leads to fratricide or strategic fallout.
Which brings us perfectly to the final piece, joint planning and command authorities. Because before you execute anything, you have to know what kind of legal authority you're operating under.
This is critical. There are 4 levels. The top is COCOM, Combatant Command Authority. It is supreme, and it cannot be delegated. Only the CCDRs have it.
But they have to let subordinate commanders actually run the missions.
Right, so they delegate OPCON, operational control. This is the authority to organize commands and employ forces for specific tasks.
And below that is TACON.
Tactical control. This is heavily restricted to the detailed, localized direction of movements in a specific area. It does not grant authority to change the unit's overarching mission.
And then there's the administrative side, ADCON.
Administrative control. This flows through individual service channels, fulfilling the Title 10 requirement to organize, train, equip, and discipline personnel. Even if a unit is globally deployed under a joint commander's OPCON, their ADCON remains with their specific service branch.
So as a TSGT, why does this distinction matter so much?
Because if you confuse them, the theater strategy fractures. If a TSGT under TACON assumes they have OPCON, they might try to reassign their unit's primary mission. That breaks joint protocol. Or if a joint commander tries to use ADCON to discipline an airman from another branch, they are violating Title 10 of the U.S. Code.
Administrative wreckage again?
Exactly. You have to understand the matrix.
So once authorities are clear, the staff uses the joint planning process, the JPP. And the text says this always starts with the military end state in mind.
Yes. You visualize the precise condition of victory before you move a single asset.
And it's a sequence. It starts with mission analysis, figuring out the exact problem and limitations, then COA development course of action, building different potential solutions that have to be suitable, feasible, acceptable, distinguishable, and complete.
But the real crucible is step 4, COA analysis, which is wargaming.
Right, and I want you to paint a picture of this for me. What does wargaming actually look like? Are they just sitting around a table rolling dice?
Not exactly. It's a highly structured, analytical simulation of the chaotic ripple effects of a decision. It's strict action, reaction, counteraction. Planners force their hypothetical strategy against a simulated adversary, a red team.
Okay, so give me an example.
Action. The joint force executes an airborne insertion to seize a logistical hub. Reaction. The red team adversary initiates a synchronized cyber attack on the regional power grid and GPS networks, blinding the transport planes.
Wow.
Counteraction. The planning staff has to instantly determine if they have the cyber defense protocols and alternative astrodynamic navigation to sustain the assault. Wargaming forces you to navigate catastrophic variables in a simulation, identifying vulnerabilities before they result in actual casualties.
And you do COA comparison, pick the best one, and recommend it to the commander. And this happens in 2 speeds, right? Campaign planning, which is proactive shaping of the environment, and crisis planning.
Crisis planning is triggered by an unanticipated event, a disaster, a hostile action. It requires highly compressed, accelerated decision-making because the environment is deteriorating faster than standard cycles can process.
Regardless of the speed, it all results in operation orders. The military's precise sequence of directives starts with a warning order, so units can start preliminary planning. Then a planard, providing essential guidance.
Then the alert word. This approves the course of action but strictly prohibits actual physical execution.
You can't move yet.
Right. Then comes the prepare to deploy order, And finally, the deployment order, which legally authorizes the physical movement of assets. And all of this is wrapped in a CONOPS, a concept of operations, giving the clear narrative of the commander's intent.
It's incredible. The administrative machinery is total. If you're a TSGT, misinterpreting a WARNERD or an MDS code literally creates a cascading systemic failure. We have mapped this whole invisible web today, from the aerodynamic physics of a jet through the statutory laws of Goldwater-Nichols and Key West, up to the combatant commands, and deep into the wargaming of the joint planning process.
And that is the level C expectation for a technical sergeant. You are the critical interface between theoretical doctrine and the physical execution of violence. The system is designed to project overwhelming power, but it is entirely dependent on the flawless clinical execution of the bureaucratic logic that binds it all together. A failure in logic is a failure in the mission.
Which brings me to a final sort of provocative thought for you to mull over. As warfare enters this era of artificial intelligence and lightning-fast cyber threats, can this methodical step-by-step joint planning process like COA wargaming actually keep up? Or will the doctrine of decentralized execution become the literally only way a modern military can survive because the environment changes faster than human commanders can plan? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us and analyzing the system. This concludes today's analysis on the Deep Dive.